Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We're going to take an ancient argument, put it under a microscope, and really stress test it. See if it holds up or if it just breaks. Okay, let's just jump right in. Think of this whole thing as a logic puzzle. The goal here isn't to pick a side or say who's right or wrong. Nope, we're just going to follow the breadcrumbs of this one particular argument and see exactly where it takes us.
So, the entire argument we're digging into today, it all comes down to how you interpret one single, really powerful statement. And according to the source we're looking at, the way you read this one little line, it changes everything.
And here it is. This is the sentence right at the heart of the whole debate. The logic we're about to follow uses this as its launch pad, to challenge a very specific way of thinking.
All right, so this is the crucial jump in logic that's being questioned. You see how it goes from the idea on the left, Sabbath was made for man, to the conclusion on the right, therefore, we don't need it anymore. That leap, from A to B, that's the exact thing we're going to test.
So how do you even test something like that? Well, the method here is actually pretty simple, but it's really clever. You take the exact same formula, A was made for B, therefore B doesn't need A, and you just plug in other things. I mean, if the logic is solid, it should work no matter what you plug in, right?
Okay, let's run the first test case. The source applies this exact logic to something we all know is essential for survival. This is going to set the pattern for everything that follows.
So here's the first parallel. We're swapping out Sabbath for food. Same exact structure. Food was made for man, therefore we don't need to eat anymore. Now, the first part of that statement is totally true, right? But that conclusion, it just immediately feels, well, wrong, doesn't it?
And yeah, right away, the problem just slaps you in the face. The conclusion isn't just a little off, it's completely absurd. Nobody would ever argue this seriously, and, well, that is exactly the point the source is making.
So what are the stakes here, really? The argument is basically setting these two things up as parallel necessities. Food is for physical survival, and, the argument goes, the Sabbath is for spiritual identity, a connection to the covenant. See the parallel? Okay, so the food example led to a pretty ridiculous conclusion. But hey, maybe that was just a one-off, a fluke, right? Well, let's see. The next step applies the very same logic to two more basic ideas, marriage and heir. And the pattern just keeps going. If you apply this logic to marriage, you get the conclusion that marriage is unnecessary. If you apply it to heir, you get the idea that we don't need to breathe, which is, just called nonsense. Both of these conclusions are just thrown out immediately.
Now, to really hammer the point home, the test is run one last time, but against two absolutely massive examples, taking this whole line of reasoning to its ultimate logical conclusion.
And with these last two, light and earth, the absurdity just ramps up even more. The idea that we can just live in darkness, or that the earth itself is unnecessary, that dismantles the very possibility of existence. And this, the source claims, is where this foolish logic ultimately leads.
So, after testing this logic against everything from food all the way up to the earth itself, we finally get to the source's final verdict. And it's not just a verdict on the Sabbath, it's a verdict on the entire way of thinking used to dismiss it.
This slide really shows the domino effect that's being implied. The whole idea is that if you're going to be consistent with this logic, then knocking over that first domino, rejecting the Sabbath, means you have to knock over the next one, and the next one, until the whole foundation just comes crashing down. And this really gets to the heart of the critique. The source labels this kind of reasoning self-contradictory. Why? Because when you apply its own rule consistently, it just leads to these impossible self-defeating results. Basically, it fails its own test.
So the final conclusion here is a total reframing of the whole idea. Instead of being some outdated rule you can just toss aside, the Sabbath is presented as an absolutely essential gift. Just as essential as the food, or the air, or the other things that were used in these logic tests. And that leaves us with a bigger question, doesn't it? This whole logic test was about one very specific idea, but it makes you think about how we judge arguments in general. So where do you draw the line between a new way of looking at something and a flat-out contradiction? That's definitely something to think about after today's explainer.